Growing up, I never really thought much about my family's history. My parents were more focused on the present and future, often sharing stories about their own childhoods and dreams for their careers. My grandfather, on the other hand, was a man of few words. He had a rugged demeanor, and while I respected him, I never felt a strong connection. He would often sit in his worn armchair, staring out the window, seemingly lost in thought. I had always wondered what went through his mind, but my questions remained unasked and unanswered. One rainy Saturday afternoon, while looking for something to do, I decided to help my parents clean out the attic. It was one of those spaces where old memories collected dust. Boxes upon boxes of forgotten toys, clothes that hadn't fit in years, and pieces of furniture that had lost their purpose. As I climbed the creaky stairs, I was hit with a musty smell that signified years of neglect. I was initially just looking to find something interesting, but I never expected what I was about to uncover. In a dim corner, covered in dust and cobwebs, I found an old wooden box. It was small, perhaps a foot long and half that in width, with brass hinges that looked like they had been polished once, but were now dull. Intrigued, I lifted the box and blew off the dust, revealing intricate carvings on its surface. They appeared to be floral designs interspersed with what looked like military insignias. A wave of curiosity washed over me. I had never seen anything like this in our home before. As I carefully opened the box, the hinges creaked in protest. Inside, I found an assortment of items: faded photographs, letters tied with a worn string, and a small leather-bound journal. The photos showed a younger version of my grandfather, wearing a military uniform, standing alongside other young men who also donned the same attire. There was a mixture of pride and sorrow in their expressions, and for the first time, I saw a glimpse of a life I knew nothing about. The letters were addressed to my grandfather, but they weren't from family members. They were written by a woman named Clara, and the first letter I pulled out was dated 1942. It was filled with love and longing, revealing a side of my grandfather that felt so distant and foreign. I started to read, captivated by her words, which described life back home while he was away at war. Clara spoke about her fears and hopes, her love for my grandfather shining through every word. I could feel my heart racing as I realized I was touching pieces of my family's history. Questions flooded my mind. Who was Clara? What happened to her and my grandfather? What stories did my grandfather never share with us? I was filled with a sense of urgency to uncover more about this hidden chapter in my family's history. I gathered the letters and photographs, feeling like I had stumbled upon a treasure trove of emotions and experiences that would connect me to my grandfather in a way I had never imagined. I took them downstairs, my heart pounding with excitement, and sat down at the kitchen table, ready to dig deeper into this newfound treasure. I had to know more about Clara and my grandfather's life during the war. Little did I know, this was just the beginning of a journey that would change my perception of family and history forever. As I sat at the kitchen table, the dim light of the afternoon sun filtering through the window, I felt like a detective on the cusp of solving a decades-old mystery. I had never experienced anything quite like this before. A mixture of thrill and trepidation coursed through me. I gently sorted through the letters, my fingers tracing the faded ink as I tried to immerse myself in Clara's world. The first letter was a mere introduction, but it sparked my curiosity. I needed to know more. I dove into each letter with the fervor of someone uncovering lost secrets. Clara's words painted vivid pictures of life during the war. She spoke of the rationing of food, the sirens that wailed through the night, and the news of fallen soldiers that gripped the community in fear and sorrow. Yet, amidst the darkness, there was a light, her unwavering love for my grandfather. In one particularly poignant letter, she described how she would sit by the radio, anxiously waiting for news about him and his unit, always hopeful that he was safe. As I read more, I stumbled upon a letter that made my breath catch in my throat. Clara wrote about a specific event in 1943, an air raid that had come too close to their town. She recounted how the townsfolk banded together, sheltering one another, but also how she had received the heartbreaking news of a mutual friend's death. It struck me as profoundly personal, almost like eavesdropping on a moment that should have been private. I wondered how this had affected my grandfather. What kind of man had he been during such a tumultuous time? As I continued to read, a pattern emerged. Each letter contained not just updates, but also snippets of Clara's life, her dreams of becoming a nurse, her commitment to volunteer work, and her hope for a peaceful future. She spoke of the war not just as a backdrop, but as a catalyst for her own aspirations, which made me think about how war reshapes individuals and communities. What Clara didn't know was that her words would not only reveal my grandfather's past, but would also help me understand my own family's dynamics. Once I finished reading all of Clara's letters, I moved on to the photographs. Each image captured a moment frozen in time: my grandfather posing with his comrades, Clara at a community picnic, and even candid shots of small-town life. People laughing, children playing, life going on despite the chaos of war. There was one photograph, however, that stood out to me the most. It showed my grandfather and Clara standing together, arms around each other, their smiles wide and genuine. The connection between them was undeniable. It was a snapshot of love amidst uncertainty. The photograph sparked a desire to dig even deeper. I wanted to know more about Clara, so I grabbed my laptop and began searching for her name. It was a long shot, but I figured I might find some mention of her online. Hours slipped by as I scoured social media, local history websites, and even ancestry forums. Eventually, I discovered a community page dedicated to the history of our town, where residents shared stories, photos, and records of the past. Just as I was about to give up hope, I stumbled upon a post about a Clara Harrison, a nurse during the war who had volunteered tirelessly to aid the wounded soldiers. I felt a surge of excitement as I read through the comments. People praised her selflessness and shared anecdotes about her kindness. One comment in particular caught my eye. A woman mentioned that Clara had returned to the town after the war, but had never married. I wondered why. Had she lost my grandfather? Or had he come back, and they had simply drifted apart? The possibility stirred emotions within me. I realized this wasn't just about my grandfather. It was about the web of relationships and experiences that shaped who we are as a family. Each new piece of information felt like a thread being woven into a tapestry of history. I found myself yearning to talk to my grandfather about Clara, to confront the silence he had maintained for so long. The following day, with a newfound determination, I planned a visit to my grandfather's house. I felt nervous and excited at the same time. I wanted to know his side of the story. I wanted to understand how his experiences had shaped him and, consequently, my family. My heart raced at the thought of finally bridging the gap between our generations, of peeling back the layers of history that had been carefully preserved in that dusty attic box. As I prepared for my visit, I carefully selected the letters and photographs I would take with me. I hoped they would serve as conversation starters, pieces of the past that would spark something in my grandfather. The anticipation hung in the air, heavy with possibility. I had a feeling that this was going to be a pivotal moment not just for me, but for my grandfather too. Perhaps a moment of catharsis where he could finally share the stories that had remained locked away for far too long. Driving to my grandfather's house, I felt a mixture of apprehension and excitement. The letters and photographs sat on the passenger seat beside me, like a bridge between our worlds. I had never felt so eager to understand a part of my family's history that had always been shrouded in silence. As I pulled into his driveway, I took a moment to breathe, steeling myself for what was to come. My grandfather was sitting in his usual spot, that worn armchair by the window, which faced the street. He looked up as I entered, his expression a mix of surprise and curiosity. "What's brought you here today?" he asked, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. I returned his smile, though I could sense a shadow of apprehension in the air. "I found something in the attic," I began, gesturing to the box I was carrying. I set it down on the table between us, the air charged with unspoken stories. His gaze fell on the box, and I watched as a flicker of recognition crossed his face. For a moment, I thought he might hesitate, retreating into that familiar silence, but instead, he leaned forward, intrigued. "What did you find?" he asked, and I could tell his interest was piqued. My heart raced as I opened the box and revealed the letters and photographs. "These are letters from Clara," I explained, watching his reaction closely. "She wrote to you during the war." At the mention of Clara's name, my grandfather's expression softened. A deep, contemplative look settled on his face, and I knew I had struck a chord. He picked up one of the faded letters, gently unfolding it as if it were a delicate relic. His fingers trembled slightly as he began to read, the lines of his face deepening with memories I could only imagine. "I remember her," he finally said, his voice low and distant. "Clara was special. She kept me grounded when everything felt like it was falling apart." He paused, collecting his thoughts, and I seized the moment to ask questions. "What was she like?" I urged, leaning forward. "She was strong, passionate about helping others. Always laughing, always smiling, even in the darkest times," he reminisced, his gaze drifting as he recalled moments from the past. "We wrote to each other every chance we got. Her letters kept me alive out there." I felt a lump form in my throat, realizing the emotional weight of what he was sharing. This was a side of my grandfather I had never seen, vulnerable and full of yearning. As he shared stories about his time in the war, I could see the young man he had once been, a scared soldier, bravely fighting for his country while clinging to Clara's words for comfort. He spoke of battles, of comrades who had become brothers, and of the moments that had tested his spirit. I felt as if I were sitting across from a ghost, watching as he relived a life full of heartache and resilience. He shared how, after the war, he returned home with hopes of finding Clara. "But things had changed," he said, a shadow crossing his face. "I learned she had moved away, and I never got the chance to find her again." I felt the weight of regret in his voice, as if the years had pressed down on him, leaving scars that never quite healed. "Did you ever stop loving her?" I asked, the question hanging heavily in the air. He paused, staring out the window for a long moment, as if searching for the right words. "No, I never did," he finally admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was my first love, and those kinds of feelings, they don't just disappear." As he spoke, I could see how Clara had shaped his life choices, how her memory influenced his relationships and decisions. It was a revelation, the realization that my grandfather had carried this burden alone, never sharing the depth of his feelings with anyone. I felt a surge of empathy wash over me, recognizing the silent struggles we all face, often hidden from view. "Why didn't you ever talk about her?" I finally asked, needing to understand the silence that had enveloped my family for so long. He sighed, looking down at the letters in his hands. "I thought it was better to forget, to move on. The world expected that of me, and I believed it too. But I guess some things stay with you no matter how hard you try to bury them." As our conversation continued, I pulled out the photograph of him and Clara. He took it in his hands, his eyes glistening with a mixture of nostalgia and sorrow. "We were so young," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "So full of hope." I watched him closely, realizing that these moments were a gift, an opportunity for both of us to heal. "It's never too late to remember," I said softly, feeling a sense of urgency. "You can honor her memory by sharing your stories." He nodded slowly, a flicker of understanding crossing his face. The rest of the afternoon flew by as we shared stories and memories. I told him about what I had discovered in the attic, and how those letters had opened my eyes to the complexities of family history. For the first time, it felt like we were no longer just grandfather and grandson, but two souls connecting over shared emotions and experiences. As the sun began to set, casting a warm golden light across the room, I realized that I had not just uncovered my grandfather's past, but had also forged a new bond with him. The silence that once hung heavy between us was now filled with understanding and acceptance. Clara had been a thread connecting us, a link to our family's history that was finally being woven into the present. Before I left, I looked at him and said, "Thank you for sharing this with me. It means more than you know." He smiled, a genuine smile that lit up his weathered face. "Thank you for finding it, for caring." As I drove home, I felt a deep sense of gratitude. I had not only discovered a part of my grandfather's life, but had also found a way to bring us closer together. The old box that had once been buried in the attic had opened up a world of understanding and connection, bridging the gap between generations. I realized that while the past could never be changed, it could certainly inform the present, and in doing so, it had the power to heal. With every word exchanged, a new chapter of our family story was being written, one that would resonate for years to come. I looked forward to sharing it with my family, carrying forth the legacy of love, loss, and resilience that Clara and my grandfather had lived through, ensuring that their stories would never be forgotten.